All right, good morning, Doug. We're back with some viewer questions. First of all, viewers, if you have questions, best thing to do is join our Telegram group. In that Telegram group, I solicit questions regularly, and then Doug and I tackle them here during one of the podcasts. Typically, it's on Fridays. So you'll see a link to the Telegram group in the description. Go sign up there, and we'll get to your questions if we can. So, Doug, number one, what are your views on what happens when governments collapse? Like, what appears after a collapsing government?
Hmm. Well, I think it's often chaos, but the chaos usually evidences itself in the capital city with lots of government employees and politically oriented people. So, and just because the government collapses doesn't mean the society has to collapse, or for that matter, even that the currency has to collapse. Oh, that can certainly happen. Uh, Unfortunately, we live in such an unstable world today where everybody is politically oriented and governments control everywhere, roughly 50% of their economies, much more than's ever been the case before in industrial times. So if governments do collapse this time around, it's bound to be a lot more serious than when governments have collapsed in the past. That's my reasoning.
That makes sense. Yeah, since they have their tentacles in all of society, the economy, everything, that if they go, they'll take it with them.
Yeah.
Makes more chaos. Okay.
Incidentally, I don't know if anybody has thought to send something in on this, but I must admit to watching Tucker Carlson's show on Fox every night, and usually every night. And he had a very interesting presentation last night on Homeland Security, setting up a new department. It's called the Department of Misinformation or Disinformation. What's it called?
It's a disinformation governance board.
Yes. And the description he gave of this absolutely scary, horrible woman who's running it, and the fact that they'd set something like that up, it actually is an Orwellian ministry of truth, where since when does the government set up something to examine what's disinformation and apparently do something about it? I mean, this is absolutely over the top. They haven't
Well,
ever done anything quite like this. They
but
probably have, but I can't think of it. I mean, this
but
is
all
really
all
scary.
totalitarian regimes do this, though, didn't they? I mean,
Yeah,
Stalin had it. Hitler had one. I mean, I think they all have a ministry of truth at
yeah,
that level. And I think it's just the hard thing to realize is that we must, at least in the eyes of our leaders, be entering a period that is much like when those other periods where Hitler and Stalin were in charge, which is terrifying to imagine.
yeah. And this Department of Homeland Security uh, has their campus on the grounds of the old St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Southeast Washington, which is a very large campus. I mean, it's a substantial portion of a square mile. And it was an insane asylum. And they've taken it over. And all of these government agencies that have to do with Homeland Security are set up there. And now there's this one. And these people, you know, they all kind of believe in the same values. Otherwise, this is really scary stuff.
It is
And
a
what's
couple
going to
months
happen?
ago. Well,
Oh,
a couple
let
months
me,
ago, we go ahead.
no, go ahead. Nothing else. I'm just
I was
expressing shock.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you remember a couple months ago, we went over the Homeland Security memo that they sent out, where they specifically articulated what they called them MDMs. I think they were, because I was comparing it with weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. They called it misinformation, malinformation, or misinformation, disinformation, malinformation.
Mm,
So MDMs, and they called that the greatest threat to the institution of the state and the government, and of course the country itself. In that memo, and we went through it, and at the time it was shocking, but you just didn't.
yeah.
It didn't yet have teeth embedded in it. But now you see them actually setting up a law enforcement arm that's specifically to go after people for that. It'll be interesting. It's That's dangerous times ahead, I think.
Yes, and of course, a lot of naive people who feel that the Republicans will win in November, and I suspect they will, unless the Democrats actively and aggressively steal the election. But the Republicans really aren't any better, and they'll just try to, once an agency is set up, it's extremely hard to abolish an agency for all kinds of reasons. I mean, there's civil servants and God knows what else, and they'll just want to direct it towards bad Democratic misinformation as opposed to good Republican misinformation. It's pretty
Right.
hopeless at this point.
Exactly. Yeah. But I mean, listen, most of them have actually Republican and Democrat at most of the end of the day, they all are very pro state, or else they wouldn't even be, they wouldn't go and want to serve the state in the capacity they are serving and if they weren't pro state. So, I mean, in the end of the day, it's bad for people because, the things that they identified specifically, as mis and disinformation are the things that like the Hunter Biden laptop, for instance, which clearly was not misinformation. It was not a Russian hoax. So this is the kind of stuff that they'll go after directly, and it's going to be more interesting.
Yeah, it's really like in Weimar Germany when you had to decide whose side you're on. And the two sides were you on the side of the Nazis or the communists? Better join one group or the other.
I think, is there a third choice? Okay, Doug, what are your thoughts on betting on forex volume? Or forex volatility.
Well, yeah, I try to watch all these commodity markets, at least out of the corner of my eye, looking for something that strikes me, and everything is subjective, as an anomaly. So when it comes to currencies right now, I have no real opinion. The dollar has been very strong. And you'd think that the commodity currencies, which is to say the Australian dollar, the New Zealand dollar, Canadian dollar, and the US dollar, but only the US dollar has really been strong recently. So no opinion. I mean, it's which ship is going to sink the slowest? I don't know. I don't have any current bets.
Okay, it's amazing, that I saw this big headline in the Wall Street Journal about how strong the dollar's been. It lost 20% of its value last year, basically, though. Because look at inflation, we lost 20% of purchasing power.
Well, and people read financial reporting in the Wall Street Journal and similar, and the people that are writing this stuff are idiots. They have no grasp of actual economics. They're just journalists that have been shunted over to financial journalism. They know nothing except what they're told, or they repeat what some other moron says. So you can't trust anything that you read in the paper, actually. Never could, but it's worse now.
Especially not now. Well, that's what this, misinformation czar will help with, I think.
Yes, they'll straighten it out for us. Thank God we have an agency that's on top of the problem. It's about time.
About time. All right. In a recent interview, this viewer heard you say that the central banks are trapped this time and can't raise rates. Assume for thought experiment that they raised rates to greater than 15%. The stock market would crash, the economy stopped, people lost their homes, starving and death in the street. Where's the flaw in this thought experiment that allows me to rule it out as a possibility? What you're saying is...
Okay. Well, first of all, interest rates are going up regardless of what the central banks do. And my argument for that is, with inflation running as high as it is right now, the bond market and people that own bonds, including pension funds and insurance companies, are going to start dumping bonds wholesale because they're losing 10% per year on them. And when you sell bonds, interest rates go up. So it doesn't matter what the Federal Reserve does at this point. I mean, they're actually trapped and painted into a corner. So, and to answer the question, what'll happen then? Yeah, all kinds of people are gonna, corporations will fail with high interest rates, and people can't pay their bills, and there's high unemployment, and yeah, this is it's scary stuff, and it's going to happen regardless of what the central banks do. Who knows what they're going to do?
Okay. What happens to equities and retirement accounts and things like that if the dollar gets replaced with something else or it collapses?
Well, this happens all the time in various countries. I mean, like Argentina and Brazil, two countries on either side of us here in Uruguay, have competed with each other in destroying currencies and replacing them with something. You know, the cruzado replaces the cruzeiro, which is replaced by the real, and they had another currency in Brazil that they replaced, and they do this in Argentina, the same thing too. They had the austral, and then it was the new peso. This happens all the time, and some countries don't actually just totally destroy the peso, like Chile and Argentina. They just keep inflating it and inflating it and inflating it, and life goes on. So, you know, you basically want to own real wealth and equity, and you know the financial system has a life of its own. But in these backward countries, they're not as highly financialized as the U.S. is. People don't pay much attention to these local stuff, you know, third world stock markets the way we do in the U.S. The whole world doesn't rotate around the stock and bond markets. I mean, nobody gives a damn about South American bonds. I mean, nobody takes it seriously. The U.S., that's a different story. So I don't know. When the U.S. fails, it's going to be a big deal and much different, because it's not like when one of these dog shit countries down here fails. Well, so what? Then the rich Argentines or the rich Brazilians or whatever country is, you know, they'll look at it and they'll come in and buy local assets and it'll rebuild. But that's not the way it is if the U.S. fails, because everybody's got dollars and everybody's got U.S. assets as they try to hide from serious stuff in these dog shit countries. So that's a $64 question.
Yeah, maybe it's so basically because all of our assets are in dollars, we get crushed along the way, and there aren't the wealthy few, you know, that come in can acquire the assets, get them back into production, and make things work again. You're saying so that money needs to come from outside of the U.S., like the Chinese or something.
Yes, and of course the U.S. has always been a place where you could run and hide with your capital if things were bad. No matter where things were bad, well, you could always go to the U.S., open a bank account, but when the U.S. turns into something resembling the USSR, now where do you go? Now you got a real problem.
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know the answer to that question, actually.
It'll be interesting though. We might get to see it, Doug. We might get to see it firsthand. So
I know we can say, well, that's in the you'll find out department. We'll all find
exactly.
out. Oh.
Right. Stay tuned, folks. Let's see. Doug, somebody says that you're reticent to identify deliberate, malicious, coordinated conspiracy, instead preferring to call the situation a pit of vipers. My question is, what would you need to see in order to form the view that economic and social destruction is deliberate and calculated rather than incompetency or infighting?
Well, you and I talk about this a lot, of course, and I know you tend more towards the active conspiracy part, and I'm more towards it's just a pit of vipers doing what they do, because it's their nature, as opposed to they really coordinate with each other. But here's a thought on this subject. It's that I think absolutely everybody, or almost absolutely everybody, thinks they're doing the right thing. I mean, like all the great dictators in world history were convinced that what they were doing was for the good. Well, they didn't define good very tightly or accurately, in my view, but everybody feels that they're the good guy. They really do. So, you know, these conspiratorial guys that all share the same views, went to the same schools, go to the same clubs, have the same psychology, etc. Well, they're not necessarily a conspiracy, but you know.
But they could all be pursuing the same good.
Right, and they're all pursuing the same good. They all think they're the good guys, and they think that we're the bad guys who are the forces of chaos. I mean, you can't can't have all these people running around doing their own things. They've got to be ordered. So I don't know.
But what if that? I guess it maybe just feels different when you imagine that what they might consider good is an 80% reduction in people on Earth.
Listen, I can understand that sometimes when you see these mobs of people in these giant cities. You say, my God, what if they double in size again? Then what happens? They double in size again, and you know, and who'll be around to save the dolphins and God forbid save the whales? So yeah, it's understandable how they'd want to see, for the common good of the remaining people, that most of these useless mouths would disappear
Well,
and go away.
well, I think they refer to them and us actually as useless eaters. So, Doug, I'm showing you on the screen here this chart I saw today, which I found very interesting. I hope you can see it. It's just, these are basically, if you're trying to meet the global warming goals, reduction in carbon emissions. Okay, this is essentially a visual illustration of the level of carbon reduction required in order to meet that. And you can see Canada is actually the largest, per capita, even above the U.S. But the red line is the living standards that would have to be reduced in order for us to meet the goal of limiting warming to just 1.5 degree over the coming century. And basically, it would require everybody to have living standards very similar to those in Vietnam. And this is for the good. I mean, I don't know.
No, these people really are. I mean, they're actually criminally insane. I mean, first of all, is there anything really wrong with global warming? And the answer to that question is, I'd say no, not at all, quite frankly. And more likely, we're going to have natural global cooling. I mean, this whole thing is, we're dealing with evil and crazy chimpanzees. And they put out
Okay.
nice looking charts that, explain all this and will justify almost anything. And
But
the
if
situation is pretty hopeless.
so why wouldn't that be called conspiracy though then? Because let's say all these people believe that humans are destroying the earth and which will lead to the end of all humanity altogether. And so what they need to do is they need to push things forward to stop the emission of carbon, which seems like it wouldn't be so bad, but apparently it is, and are really setting that as a top priority, and then are making all kinds of other coordinated policies to help reach that end. In terms of controlling the population. I mean, even what you see with all of the stuff that's happening in Russia now, it's hard to not see it kind of as a conspiracy for me, because Germany is being forced down this curve really fast right now because they're the carbon emissions are being forced down. They're just they would never do it willingly. Like they would never make this choice, but if it's suddenly thrust upon them by powers outside of their control, then they end up there.
And did I hear, speaking of, I guess it can be either an informal conspiracy where people are just kind of acting the same way because they share common values, et cetera, or there's somebody that actually directs and gives orders. And does Klaus Schwab give orders? I don't think he's in a position to give anybody orders.
No, I don't think so either. But I do think that but if you look at like the targets that the UN has set out around global emissions, around carbon emissions, and that have been adopted by lots of other countries, and then you have that adopted in the corporate sector through the World Economic Forum, through Klaus. They gotten on board with this idea that this is really important and it must happen, and to their own detriment, strangely enough. That's the thing that makes you go, when a company chooses to do that, which is necessarily going to result in lower profits for itself, it seems like irrational. Like, why would they do that? Just like it seems like, why would a nation's leader punish its citizens by pushing them into the dark ages, by denying them access, to fossil fuels?
Well, perhaps it goes back to my preferred definition of the word stupidity. and it's an unwitting tendency to self-destruction. And let me back that up with a quote from Einstein: after hydrogen, stupidity is the most common thing in the universe.
Hmm.
So I think those two thoughts kind of go together.
Okay, so it could be, but it could be a conspiracy in that there's an agreement about what good is. Good is like this climate change initiatives that are seem to be, all the rage among the elites, and then they're all working toward that, but they're so stupid that they simply don't understand actually the consequences of their behaviors because they live in a world of abstraction where they basically spend time in, making speeches and signing papers. That's the world they live in.
Yeah, it is. I don't know what we do about it, quite frankly. I mean, there is such a thing as human nature, and we can agree on the parts of human nature we like, but essentially, we're herd animals because it's very hard for an individual human to survive on his own. Even Robinson Crusoe, who survived on his own, couldn't have survived on his own unless he had all the things that he salvaged off of his sunken boat. So if you walk out into the forest naked, it's going to be tough surviving for more than a few days. So we're herd animals, and it's hard to get away from that. And the problem is that we were talking about Schopenhauer earlier. That's what it was. There is a quote from Schopenhauer, and I think he said, every person taken as an individual is reasonably intelligent and rational, but once you put them together into a mob, he immediately turns into a blockhead, or words to that effect. And that's pretty much the way it works. And as herd animals, which we are, herds kind of need leaders. I mean, or leaders assert themselves for various reasons. And of course, the kind of people that want to lead other people are naturally the most destructive of personal freedom and so forth. You can't lead forcefully unless you're going to take away the personal freedom. So it's, we're kind of painted into a corner. It wasn't such a problem before we had really, really powerful technologies.
Right.
I mean, it was just kind of mildly amusing. But now it's a little bit different. It'll be more different yet, I think, in 50 years. Soon we don't destroy ourselves in between now and then.
Which seems like a possibility. Like no one asked about this, Doug, in any of the questions, and I don't know why people don't. But like, how on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say the likelihood of of nuclear deployment of some kind, tactical nuke or something like that, in the next decade? Let alone the next 10 months, honestly, it could look at even 10 months from now. But
yeah, these idiots are really moving towards this. Did I hear that that not only are the Germans now shipping all kinds of military materiel to Ukraine, but Biden has talked about tens of billions of aid of all types to Ukraine. And what is it that, is there some snippet in the news that that NATO aircraft launched from Romania are working with the Ukrainians? Is that right?
boy, I did not hear that yet, but that would be a huge escalation to do something like that. I do know that Biden wants to send. The only restrictions on the type of weapons we would send are that they have to be conventional weapons, no nuclear weapons. That was the only restrictions on it. So, but yeah, if they're flying planes out of Romania, that's not good.
It's a NATO country. And then you got to ask yourself, well, what the hell is Romania doing? Well, what the hell is NATO doing existing to start with? I mean, all these problems, but once these bureaucracies are established and set up, they don't disappear until they collapse catastrophically.
Yep.
So, I was previously of the opinion that, okay, the Russians would, after having been provoked, would would straighten out the situation in Donbass, which would become independent countries, and Crimea would be reincorporated into Russia, and it would, as close as possible, go back to the status quo ante. But it seems like it is spinning out of control at this point.
It does. It does. And I mean, it's hard to see the way how it ends, but you see the escalation curve, still growing. And if you just extrapolate that out a little bit, you end up in this possibility where anything is possible, where it's just the rationality is off the table. I mean, it just feels like it's already off the table, frankly, with the lack of diplomacy and the constant escalation.
Yeah, it's like World War One. We could be sleepwalking into World War One.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Do you think anyone today can become sovereign, meaning not a subject of any state? And would this, if so, would this be an important goal to pursue?
Yeah. Can you really? Well, the problem is that whatever political entity you're in, might decide that you need to be tightened up a little bit. And what are you going to do about it? If they have the army or they have the police, I mean, unless you got your own army or your own police. So it's very hard being sovereign. I mean, maybe the closest that you can come is to, if you're of a certain age, which is to say not too old, and have skills and a certain psychology, maybe you can wander around the world like Kwai Chang Caine did in that great series Kung Fu. I mean, he was kind of sovereign,
Right.
but I don't know. What's the answer? Have you thought about this?
No, I mean, I don't. It all depends upon exactly the way you define sovereign. I think you can be less impacted by the state and become more impacted by the state, but I don't think you could avoid the fact that the state is there, and the state, even if you think you don't belong to the state has other ideas in mind, and so
Yes. It's like Nietzsche said, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you.
exactly right. But I think you can be less subject to the state, and that just becomes being about being more independent and less, outside of the core power centers of the state. If you're in a major city like New York or London, for instance, then I think that the state is there almost every minute of your day in one form or another. If you live in the middle of Iowa, the state's you're not gonna notice very often. You're not gonna come knocking on your door very often. You're not gonna accidentally run into him very often. And if you do, it could likely be someone the local sheriff or somebody. So
Yeah, I agree. That's the best alternative in today's world. You're quite correct, I think.
okay. So last year, Doug, you recommended that this person recommend they sell some of the real estate holdings, and they're asking where now to park the cash. If I remember right, this person is actually the person who had a lot of property in Singapore and was sitting on huge gains. And I think you suggested that she might want to consider selling it. She did sell some, and so she's curious at this point, where do you park the cash?
Hmm. Well, it seems to me the cheapest class of securities in the world today are resource stocks, they've always been favorites of mine, always, just because we all tend to specialize in something, and that's where I was led to. And I would say gold mining stocks, mid-tier, dividend yielding gold mining stocks are, and the same with oil companies, not these big crappy ones that are run by suits, but the mid-tier oil companies. Those two areas are, I would say, are two of the best places to be.
Okay, good answer. Next question. It says, Doug has more than anyone I've ever heard taken calculated risks in developing countries. My take on what I see here from these adventures is to look for those as yet undiscovered gems after a collapse. How does Doug do a smell test and assess the risks in these countries?
Hmm. Well, I put together a list. I gave a speech where I worked this out. I've never written anything about it. I ought to write it out. I'm so lazy. Of the 12 things that made Western civilization different from and better than any other civilization in the world. So I can't reel them off the top of my head, but it's a pretty good list of 12 characteristics that are actually unique to Western countries. So I really ought to write a paper on that and put it out here, because I don't have a newsletter or anything, so I guess we could just post it here for the benefit of our
Yeah.
subscribers. So, okay, so I say those 12 characteristics. Like, Haiti. There's a country that I've been to a lot, actually, over the years. I've been going to Haiti for 50 years. And I could tell you stories about, when I first went to Haiti in, it's about 1970, something like that, about then. It was a nice place. I mean, within a certain context, it was safe. It really was safe. Maybe that was just because of the Tonton Macoute, where if, anything happened to a tourist, they'd know about it and they'd be really sorry the next day. And everybody knew that. So you're really safe as a tourist. And it was cheap and it was fun. I mean, like, I remember I went to the, there's Nigerella. She's the, she's the Kievan bar girl, her sister. The Mama Poodle is a Russian nurse. So I could go into this story a little bit further. It's nice that she came to visit. And in any event, so, Haiti was so nice that at one point I thought, gee, I'd like to move here. I could set up a diving business and, so forth and so on. But the place is totally devolved at this point. I mean, is it the worst place in the world, Haiti, now, from being actually pretty reasonable to the worst place in the world with no prospects that I can see of getting better? Good question. I don't know, Matt. What do you think? I mean,
Well, I think the question was like, how do you know, when something goes through a disaster like Haiti's gone through a number of them, and you're considering whether or not making a visit there or looking for prospects there, how would you know if, like, what criteria would you know, or what data would you get that would make you think, oh, this place is worth a look at this point?
yeah. Well,
Like, what's the little country we're talking about in the South Pacific in our Monday call? What's that? The place with the copper mine?
oh, Bougainville.
Yeah. So like that. Well, what all of a sudden makes
Yeah.
it go, well, this might be worth looking at now.
Yeah. Okay. So I have an old friend who's lived on the island of Bougainville for the last 10 years. And Bougainville is not an independent country. It's on the eastern edge of Papua New Guinea. But when they had a civil war, interesting story. I mean, if you read James Michener's Tales of the South Pacific, he'd always talk about Bougainville, because in the South Pacific, when they were fighting in the Solomons and Guadalcanal and all this type of thing, Bougainville was a big deal back then. Anyway, so so this is an island of about 200 to 300 kilometers long and 50 to 100 kilometers wide. That's size island. It's got like 300,000 people, but they're a little bit different than the people on the mainland of New Guinea. They speak 16 different languages, which is relatively few for that part of the world, actually. I mean, you look at Vanuatu, which has got, I think they've got 160 mutually unintelligible languages, and they've only got like 100,000 people, natives. So anyway, so my friend Lindsay, who's been there, they had their revolution. They destroyed the copper mine. It was you know, on the path to becoming one of the biggest copper mines in the world. They totally destroyed it. It's all gone back to bush now. There's no economic activity at all on Bougainville. There's 300,000 people. It's all custom land in the South Pacific. That means that, you know, it's the borders of property are kind of loosey-goosey, you know, and not registered in office. It's custom, you know, it's just the way things have been done for not just hundreds, but thousands of years. Anyway, so we could fly to Bougainville, where Lindsay knows the president. It's a autonomous region of Papua New Guinea that could become an independent country. That's was agreed that if they want to, they could after the revolution. But I'm thinking, you know what? If we show up there and we talk to the president, we're going to be talking pidgin English. You know, me fella, you fella, plenty too much big. You know, people that we don't share a culture with or share values with. You know, so do I really need to go to another really backward country and go through this drill again? I've done this drill actually in a lot of places, and it's always been fun. But after a while, I figure, you know what? I don't want this to be like what's that movie with Bill Murray, Groundhog Day, where you know we have the same
Groundhog
problems. Yeah, exactly. So, except a new and different place where the chances of success are someplace in between slim and none. But I do it just for amusement. And you got to fill those idle hours somehow.
It is amusing.
It is amusing.
So, Casey asks, he's heard stories from Ross Beatty and others that as they've traveled the world, they've been robbed and or held at gunpoint. You know, you've been in a lot of strange places. Have you ever had an experience like that where you've been robbed or attacked or in a dicey situation?
In retrospect, I think the closest that I've come to it was actually in the Congo, in between the wars. And there were 3 or 4 of us there. And, you know, there was like a squad of young Congolese soldiers with the kind that with droopy eyelids and, you know, they weren't exhibiting proper military discipline, let's put it that way. And when you're dealing with heavily armed, drug-addled teenagers that are part of a military group, look out. I mean, that's explosive. So I felt that was scary, but nothing happened. Nothing happened, fortunately. Maybe because we were white men wearing suits and they figured, it's probably not worth the risk.
Too much trouble.
Too much trouble, yeah. But I've had really good luck. I mean, I feel like I've lived a charmed life in these dog shit countries. I really have. I mean, you know, it's like, listen, when I was in Cameroon, I spent a week there. So we had an introduction to the government, and I didn't get to meet the top guy. What the hell's his name? Is he still running the place? Anyway, so we got to know the head of the Intercontinental Hotel there's 2 capitals. One's the commercial and one's the political capital. Yaoundé and Douala, I don't know. So we were in the political capital, and we're talking to the guy who's a Frenchman who runs the Intercontinental Hotel, and we're telling him why we're there and what we're trying to do. Basically, very peacefully and gently overthrow the government and make things better for everybody. And he says, "Look, remind me not to get in a car with you." And that's all he said. So, no, the answer is no. I've had good luck, but maybe I've just kind of lived a charmed life, or maybe I didn't push things as far as, but I usually push things pretty far. So
yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it worked out. That's good.
It works out, but listen, anything can happen to anybody. Like my friend Bo Keeley, who I have taken these cross-country rail journeys with 3 days each from Colorado. One time we went to Sacramento, one time we went to Portland, and riding the rails for 3 days and 3 nights. And, you know, Bo he travels as a hobo, penniless, all over the world. He's really quite an interesting person in all kinds of ways. And he tells stories about, you know, always hanging in the sleaziest part of towns, about getting robbed and how he sequesters the money he's got with him. And so, but he's never gotten hurt,
Hmm.
even then. So who knows?
How do you see Mexico from a political and economic future? Because it's got a lot of hype about the way that's handled the pandemic situation compared to other countries. It was better, and so it's gotten on people's radar in a way it never really was before, I think. So a lot of people are asking us this question: like, is this the place to be in the future from a political and economic standpoint? They say, is it safe to be there, and is it a place where you'd want to raise kids?
Hmm. Well, Jeff Berwick loves Mexico, okay?
Yeah.
And he's very well connected in Mexico because of his wife. But I think it depends on what part of Mexico you're in to start with.
Definitely.
I mean, the far south is way different from the north. And if you're a gringo, you usually think of either the beach areas, where there's lots of other gringos. It's a big damned country. It's hard to generalize. And I don't think it's intrinsically a stable place, quite frankly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Well, my worry has always been with Mexico is that just because they're so dependent upon the U.S. and trade with the U.S., if there is an economic disaster that occurs in the U.S., the knock-on effect in Mexico, I think, would be more extreme than what you'd see at the U.S. because of it's not intrinsically stable, and because there are a lot more people that are living on the lines of poverty, and because there's violence in the culture at this point. So,
Yep.
it's
Yep.
my point of view.
I'd have to agree. That's all true. So I don't have anything in particular that draws me to Mexico. If you want a Latin country, I think you're a lot better off with, actually, I think Uruguay. You know, everybody used to love Costa Rica years ago. I don't. But we could talk about that. I think Uruguay is probably, for a lot of reasons, including its location, and it's probably the best choice on this continent.
That's why we both are here right now.
Yeah, that's right.
Your answers.
Kind of, yeah.
All right. Let's see. Just a couple more questions here. What do you think about the future of territorial taxation? Will it survive long term, or is it coming to an end?
Yeah, you got two kind of conflicting directions going on here. On the one hand, lots of these other governments are talking about doing what the U.S. is unique right now in doing, and that is taxing their citizens no matter where they live. Okay, Germany's talked about it, France, Canada, I don't know who else, lots of them have talked about this. And when they get together in these cafe clutches with other government leaders, yeah, sure, this sounds like a great idea to control the plebs and get more power to themselves. But on the other hand, all these governments are, yeah, I think it's going to happen. But at that point, you're going to find lots and lots more people renouncing their citizenships and going to other countries that aren't in a position to enforce things like that. So both things are happening at once.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you know, it's a matter of inertia and, in a way, stupidity on my part, and there's other reasons too. For financial. Why haven't I dumped my US citizenship in the past? Well, it's harder and harder to get rid of it, actually. It's like an albatross around your neck. But, and of course, the US is still a convenient and pleasant place to be. There's no question about that. So I like to go back there. But everything else being equal, especially if you can adopt something like an Irish citizenship or some other European citizenship by birth.
Yep.
You should do it. Then you can still visit the US without being part of the system and that.
Yeah, I think that's better if you can get away with it. Doug, someone asked a question about networking here. What places would one go to rub shoulders with the rich, influential?
Oh, in foreign countries or
For networking in general, just to, yeah, it could be in foreign countries. It could be, if you were even in the U.S. But I know that one place you've talked about before extensively is polo clubs. That certainly afforded you an opportunity.
Yeah, but you're not going to be welcome at a polo club unless you play polo. Frankly, you're not going to be one of the boys. And frankly, I think going to polo clubs in foreign countries, especially third world countries, automatic entree to the top of the society. So that's a really good reason to learn to play polo and get a polo handicap. Okay. Winston Churchill said, having a polo handicap is better than having a passport. And he was right. I'm convinced he was right. So that's one thing. And I guess to a lesser degree, because everybody plays golf, you should learn to play golf and you should learn to play tennis and should learn to play bridge. I don't know if it does any good to learn to play poker because people that hang out and play poker are usually lowlives, quite frankly. So, but what I've always done, in addition to that, is that I've always had a real interest in art, okay? I look at a lot and, I read about art. So I always, when I go to a country, and I used to do this more than I do now because I've gotten sick of traveling, is go to the art galleries. And they'll talk to you. They deal with people that have money, people that have taste, people in the upper strata. So if you know something about art and you can carry on an intelligent conversation, go to the art galleries and patronize them. Number one. Number two, if you have anything that you could possibly do a deal with or just whatever, interview lawyers. They'll all give you a meeting because you might be a client, you might be a rich guy from afar, they don't know. So always get in touch with the lawyers because there are always power setters everywhere. So, and the third thing is real estate brokers. Also, they deal with rich people. They know everybody. They can give you an edge. So that's when I go to if I was going to go to some foreign city, those are the 4 things that I do.
Okay. But of course you have to stand out to those people in a way where they say, hey, we'd like to do more with you. We want to know you more. We want to introduce you to more people.
Exactly. Unless you've already pre-qualified yourself as, being worthy of talking to them, you're wasting their time and wasting your time.
Right. And it won't go anywhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Yeah. One of the biggest, I think, the ways there's a foundational idea, I think, to this that I think is really important is that you have to do things that differentiate you from others. You have to be interesting so that when you do happen upon interesting people, they'll see it in you. They'll see something interesting. That's number one. And I think, and that could have been travel, could have been, writing, publishing books. Like Doug, I know that was a big thing that differentiated you from a lot of people young. Certainly writing a newsletter and having a body of work that's out there in the world and, and readers maybe around the world. Often you'd get people who would want to introduce you to people in the country that they were from. So you get people coming to you trying to say, knowing already that you're interested in going, come to town. I have some people you should meet. So,
Exactly.
but the body of work matters. Without the body of work, you've got nothing. It doesn't matter which room you're in, whose shoulders you're rubbing. Like, you got to do something.
That's right. You're just another tourist that got together airfare to take a look at the local churches or something like that. Nobody
Exactly.
cares. So, you've got to put in the hours, and you got to learn stuff and do stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good. I think I'll leave it there for today, Doug. There's lots more questions we didn't get to, but I think that's probably a good place to stop. So
Okay.
we'll leave it there. We can be back next week.
Yes, with any luck.
Yes, and you did make a comment before we started recording that there was a lot of doom in the questions we got this time as compared to average. That the ratio of doom in the questions has gone up, and this is an interesting test of the zeitgeist, we think, of our viewers, the kind of types of questions we get. So I don't know. What do you think it means, Doug? If the doom zeitgeist is growing among our viewers, not surprising, I guess, for our viewers, what do you think it means?
Yeah. Are we living in just a kind of a big silo where everybody we're talking to is thinking the same way, or maybe not? Because the other Zoom group that I'm on with a bunch of rich old Jewish guys, where I'm the outlier, actually. They try to keep a happy face, but I think they're feeling the same way too, and they're very different from this group that I'm in. So yeah, I suspect people all around the world are kind of sensing the spirit of the century, and it's not wearing a happy face.
No. Okay. Well, on that note, we'll leave it here. Thanks, Doug. I appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Matt.